Hey, what's up? It's GC Kinsey, here to talk about all the signs I was transmasculine that I showed but completely missed, and what I thought they were instead. It's almost time for National Coming Out Day, and when that day rolled around back in 2021, I shared a video called "But You Didn't Show Any Signs," which is something a lot of queer people hear when we come out later in life. In that video, I talked about how, first of all, not everyone does show early signs of being queer, and that's okay, but also how there are some signs that either aren't obvious or aren't visible. So the people around us might miss them, and we might even miss them ourselves. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. All the signs of my transmasculinity that I showed throughout my life, but only recognized in hindsight, and what I attributed those signs to instead of my gender. A brief warning before I get into this, I'm going to be discussing some sensitive subjects, including body image and fatphobia, as well as menstruation and pregnancy. So if that's not something you want to hear about, I totally understand, and I've got plenty of other videos on this channel that you might like better. With that out of the way, let's get into the signs I missed, going in chronological order. Number 1. My dress-up adventures were always full of gender f***ery. This started when I was very young, with things like dressing up as a groom and dressing my younger brother up as the bride, and that was far from the only time I put him in drag. Wearing matching Halloween costumes with my brother a few times and loving it when people mistook us for identical twins. Closet cosplaying as many male Disney villains as I did Disney princesses, including Professor Ratigan, Governor Ratcliffe, what was it with me and these rat men? And I attempted a LeFou costume from Beauty and the Beast, made out of paper so it wasn't wearable at all, which is too bad because boy was I obsessed with his gay ass. This pattern didn't stop as I got older. I dressed up as men for a few different Halloweens, including Pennywise the Clown and Freddie Mercury twice. I did baby's first drag for Halloween when I was 22 with a look recreated from Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. And throughout college, I used to just randomly put on Frankenfurter makeup in my room and take pictures for some reason. We all know the reason. But of course, the crowning glory was when I finally made the jump from major Halloween enthusiast to full-on cosplayer in my mid-20s as Beetlejuice. And the Winter Soldier, and a whole bunch of other dudes, and also plenty of drag queens, and even the occasional chick, but mostly dudes. And at the ripe old age of 29, this passion for dressing up that started when I was a literal toddler finally cracked my egg. So how did I miss this glaring sign for so long? Well, I thought I was just being creative. And because I was dressing up across the full spectrum of gender expression and not strictly in masculine looks, it never occurred to me that I had any gender stuff going on. Until I wore a beard for my Bucky Barnes cosplay, and that made it impossible to ignore. Number 2. I had major issues with my body from age 8 onward. And if you think that sounds super f***ed up, yes, you are 100% correct. When I was 8, during the summer between 2nd and 3rd grade, two things happened at once that built up a perfect storm of feeling like an alien in my body. First, I gained a lot of weight very quickly while recovering from an illness, and even though that actually brought me from being underweight up to a healthy weight, it was still a rough adjustment, because suddenly none of my clothes fit right anymore, and I felt even more self-conscious about how I would not only be one of the tallest but also generally biggest kids in my class. And on top of that, my grandma made sure to tell me how I got so fat. What the hell, grandma? And second, part of the weight I gained was just enough boobage that I had to start wearing a sports bra for the first time. Yes, going into 3rd grade, no, I'm not joking. I started puberty at 8 years old, and from that point on, living in my body felt like a constant struggle. Puberty got astronomically worse the further along it went. The middle school years were especially hard. But even after puberty was over, I wasn't happy with how my adult body had ended up. I felt like my body was never the right size, except for a brief window of time in high school when I lost a super unhealthy amount of weight, but even then I never felt like my body was the right shape. There was nothing that made it feel right to me. I never felt at home in it. I used clothing very strategically to reshape my body the best I could and hide the parts of it that bothered me the most. I self-edited my body constantly in the mirror. I loved swimming because I could bury my body under the water. I disassociated from my body a lot of the rest of the time, especially when I knew other people could see it. Looking back, this is textbook gender dysphoria, but what did I think it was at the time? I just thought I hated my body because I was fat. And I say that in quotes because even though I have been plus size at one point in the past, for most of my life I was just on the thicker and curvier side, so only fat by the standards of the beauty industry. It took me decades to realize that my issue was with fat distribution, not so much with fat itself. It was my shape rather than my size that was actually causing me all this grief, which I got so close to figuring out in high school while I was underweight, but I didn't know about trans people yet, so I never made the connection about why I thought the shape of my very thin body was wrong. In hindsight, all of this shows how prevalent and powerful fatphobia is in society, and how that can intersect with transphobia in very harmful ways. Number 3. I had an intense hatred of my period and an irrational fear of pregnancy. And the period thing was for good reason because mine had a super rough onset, as in bleeding for 3 weeks at a time, losing so much blood I became severely anemic, and ultimately being put on birth control at age 13 to regulate things. And then immediately gaining 2 cup sizes, which I don't know how much of that was genetic versus influenced by suddenly being on a daily estrogen and progesterone pill, but either way, it didn't make puberty suck any less. Once everything got under control, I actually ended up luckier than a lot of my classmates in that my periods didn't last very long, weren't overly heavy, and didn't cause me any severe pain or cramps. But I still absolutely hated getting my period. The fear of pregnancy was a lot more interesting because I wasn't having sex. I wasn't attracted to anyone in that way, and even before I knew I was ace or that asexuality even existed, I thought of sex as something adults did with their spouses, and that was just way off in the future for me. So I don't know why in my early teen years I was so scared of pregnancy. But there was a distinct shift that happened in my mind actually in the summer right before I started high school, where I went from kids are cute, I'll probably have my own someday, that seems to be what everybody else does, to oh my god, I do not want kids ever and I would rather die than have to carry one. Like, pregnancy was the first form of body horror that ever truly squicked me out. So what did I attribute all of this to? Well, of course, I just thought, doesn't every girl hate this shit? All the girls in my class complained about their periods. All the women in my family complained about their periods and their pregnancies and menopause. And when you never hear a single girl or woman in your life going, I sure do love my reproductive system, then it's probably not going to cross your mind that, hey, maybe all this hate and fear I have around my reproductive system means I'm actually not a girl. Plus, when you've never heard of trans people, you're not going to think that being a different gender is even possible. Instead, you're going to think it's totally normal to be a 15-year-old wishing for early menopause and dreaming about getting a hysterectomy and thinking, oh my god, I cannot get pregnant when you're not having sex at all. Number 4. I often felt uncomfortable or fake when hanging out in groups of all girls. And it was not for lack of trying to fit in. From a very young age, I saw the friendships that girls had and the way they seemed to understand each other and have this natural ease when they were together. And I wanted to be a part of that. But something about it just wasn't gelling for me. It always felt like swimming upstream. It did get a little easier as I got older because I started hanging out with more nerdy girls, artsy girls, girls who weren't afraid to be themselves and be weird, so then I could also be my weird self around them. But I still never quite felt like I could relate or connect to them on a gender level, and that came out in subtle and subconscious ways. Like, the concept of girl talk always confused the hell out of me because there was no subject I felt like I could only talk about with girls, you know? And certain social rituals just fully escaped me, like how at restaurants and clubs girls always wanted to go to the bathroom together. I always wanted to go alone. I didn't want my friends hearing me pee. And as much as I loved all the girls I was friends with and deeply appreciated our friendships, I still felt more comfortable hanging out in mixed gender groups. I even felt marginally more comfortable hanging out in groups where it was all boys and I was the only girl, or so we all thought at the time. But mixed gender groups put me the most at ease, even though I could never put my finger on why. I consider this a more subtle sign of my transmasculinity, because yes, dysphoria can make it harder for you to relate to others of your assigned gender, but not always. And sometimes cis people struggle to relate to others of their gender, so I don't really blame myself for missing this as a sign. But the rationale I had behind my struggle to fit in with girls honestly should have been the bigger sign, which was that during my tween and teen years, I adopted the mindset of I'm not like other girls. I know, but it's honestly hilarious to me in hindsight because of course I'm not like other girls. I'm a dude. Back when I was growing up, there wasn't the kind of pushback against I'm not like other girls that there is now. Like, if a girl said that, people didn't immediately start trying to get her to unpack her internalized misogyny. And while I think it's awesome that we as a society are thinking more deeply about the implications of that phrase, I really wish that when someone says I'm not like other girls, instead of jumping straight to talking about why that's problematic, we would start asking, are you sure you even are a girl? Maybe your gender is something worth exploring. Number 5. I loved trying to sound like a man when I sang. I've talked about this before in some of my other videos about the way my voice is changing now on testosterone, so if you've already heard this, my apologies. But if you're new here, get ready for some extremely normal cis girl thoughts I've had about my singing voice over the years. When I was in middle school and my voice went from soprano to alto during puberty, my reaction was, oh my god, this is so cool, my voice is changing like a boy's. During my early teen years, I got into rock and roll music and I was always trying to sound more like my favorite rock singers who just so happened to be men. When I was in college, I got into musical theater, and I always saw what a struggle it was to get enough men in a cast for a balanced chorus, and I used to daydream about getting cast in tenor roles, and I was so disappointed when I was in a production of Beauty and the Beast and not enough men auditioned, and they went out and recruited more men instead of casting me as my man LeFou. Also during college, I used to get a practice room in the music hall and sing my favorite tenor show tunes and try to convince the people walking by that there was an actual tenor in there. Like, come on. I don't even have a good excuse for this one. I knew about trans people by the time I was in college. Just binary trans people though, and I'm non-binary, so maybe that's why I didn't figure it out, but still, I should have at least started putting 2 and 2 together based on the voice thing alone. But instead, I was just like, oh, being able to sing like a man is a really cool skill. What woman wouldn't want to be able to do that? Number 6. I used to joke about feeling like a gay man trapped in a woman's body and wish I actually looked like one. Y'all, this is really the most glaring sign, or maybe it's tied with the voice one, but either way, those two signs together should have easily tipped me off. However, my gender envy for gay and other visibly queer men started on a subconscious level when I was in high school. I had just discovered Queen, and Freddie Mercury was not only becoming my musical idol, but also my favorite fashion icon. Some things never change, am I right? And I remember going shopping for new clothes and gravitating toward anything I could find that resembled Freddie's clothes from his glam rock era in the 1970s, either in appearance or just vibes. Of course, the struggle to find clothes that fabulous was real, but the bigger struggle was how I constantly felt like I didn't look right in the clothes I could find, and how I wished my body looked more like Freddie's. And harkening back to one of my earlier points, I thought at the time that the issue was Freddie was a whole lot skinnier than me, but of course the real issue was that I had curves in all the wrong places. My subconscious desire to look like a queer dude only grew stronger the more queer friends I made, and the more queer art and media I consumed, and the deeper I got into queer culture, especially drag culture. I loved drag queens so much and wanted to be one so bad. Well, you know what they say, don't dream it, be it. And the way I finally gave voice to this feeling after becoming a certified hag in college was by joking with my gay male friends that I felt like a gay man trapped in a woman's body. If only I could go back in time and tell myself, hey, guess what? That wasn't exactly a joke. But that is why I missed this sign. I didn't take it seriously because I didn't know I could. What very little representation I'd seen of transmasculinity at that point was binary trans men who thought they were lesbians before they transitioned and later realized they were straight. And that was just so far away from anything I could relate to. So even when I heard myself saying the words, "I feel like a gay man trapped in a woman's body" out loud, the idea that that might mean I was trans didn't even cross my mind. So there you have it. All the signs of my transmasculinity that I didn't recognize for what they were until many years later. I've heard a lot of later in life transitioners wish they had figured it out sooner and express regret for their lost youths. And while I don't regret anything about my past or the way my life unfolded, of course I wish I had noticed these signs earlier. That's why I think education and representation are so important. How could you ever be expected to know what these kinds of signs mean without a framework to understand them? How can you really reach your full potential when you don't even know what's possible? I can't go back and change how long it took to figure out my truth, but if sharing my story can help anyone else figure out their truth more easily, then that makes it all worthwhile. So now is where I want to turn the conversation over to you. If you're trans or more broadly queer in some way, are there any signs that you only recognized in hindsight? Are there signs you recognized when they happened but that you felt like you had to hide or repress? Are there signs that others recognized before you did? And as always, whether you're queer or trans or not, what questions do you have about all this? Drop a comment below and let's get a discussion going. And if you want me to make another video like this about the signs of my asexuality that I missed, let me know that too. You can also reach out to me on other social media. I'm GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I've got more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person, along with cosplay music videos, cosplay tutorials, a whole bunch of cool resources for singers about voice changes on testosterone, and more right here on this channel. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. I hope you have a fabulous National Coming Out Day, and I will see you on the next one.